Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are back. It is still Devy week and I am joined by one of the greatest Devy minds in the entire industry. You may know him as the best Twitter handle around. You may also know him as the Dynasty Captain at FootballGuys, the co-owner of the Devy Royale and the co-creator of the incredible FootballGuys Rookie Guide. He is Jeff Bell, or as you may know him, at For Whom J Bell Tolls. Jeff, how are you doing?
Great, Rich. That intro was very, very kind, and thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me on. You know, when you reached out, I really wanted to make it work, and I'm thrilled that we are able to do it. And you're somebody that I have a lot of respect for, especially on fantasy Twitter, how you carry yourself on fantasy Twitter, but your contributions to the Dynasty community. Your rookie guide is fantastic as well. So just thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's an absolute pleasure to get you on, and we'll dive in and talk some Devy. So we're going to do. I said it's Devy week. We're kind of starting to ease back into traditional Dynasty. So today we're going to do a cornerstone mock draft. So that's going to be we're going to combine the 2022, 2023, and 2024 draft classes. So it's last year's rookie class, the current rookie class we've just drafted, and then next year's rookie class. We're going to throw them all in. It's based on a 12-team Superflex tight end premium league, and we're going to kick things off. Jeff, you're the guest. You get to go first.
Yeah. So my first pick is somebody that typically, if given the choice, I want to defer to somebody that's actually in the NFL already over a Devy pick. But this one instance, I'm going to go with Caleb Williams, the Devy pick, the quarterback from USC. I think I'm comfortable enough that he's going to be the first overall pick in the 2024 draft. And his ceiling, we're playing Superflex here, his ceiling is just so much higher than I think the other quarterbacks on the board when you factor in safety as well. I mean, Anthony Richardson has a ceiling that's right there as well, but I think there's maybe some concerns on him sticking long-term. Caleb Williams, I don't have any of that. And so I think Caleb Williams is an asset that is just going to accrue value from this point forward. And so I'm going to take him with the first pick in this draft, even though I do like to defer to actual NFL players.
I love it. I was thinking that I was going to get Caleb Williams at 102 and it was going to be slightly spicy. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. I've got so few question marks about him in terms of transitioning to the next level. I think you can already pencil in that 101 next year, whether it be the NFL draft, rookie drafts, whatever. I think he's going to be the real deal, and I'm super excited about him coming in. So I'm up at the 102. I thought about maybe going wide receiver here, maybe looking at that sort of 2022 class, but I'm going to stick with the 2023 class. I'm going to go with a guy that everybody seems to be talking about constantly and has been for the last couple of months. It's Bijan Robinson. He's my Dynasty RB1. I think he's an absolute superstar. So, yeah, I'm going to steal him at the 2 and pass it back to you, Jeff, for the third overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other player that would have been in consideration to go first. And so that's a good pick there for you. But I think you're on the right track. You mentioned it, talking about the 2022 wide receivers. You know, I'm somebody that I prefer to build wide receivers, quarterbacks, especially young. And so I'm going to go Garrett Wilson with the third pick here, grabbing that 2022 wide receiver. We saw the production immediately as a rookie. And so I feel good about stepping him in there. He's getting the upgrade from Aaron Rodgers. So we'll go with him.
Love it. And I'm a Jets fan. I'm a huge Garrett Wilson fan. So, yeah, love the pick. Are you, just to sit on that slightly, how close are you with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave? I know that it felt that Garrett Wilson was ahead for most people during the rookie process last year. Chris Olave kind of came out of the gates a little bit quicker. It's sort of pick your flavor, I guess, as to which you prefer. Are you very much Wilson ahead of Olave quite firmly?
Right. Yeah, I believe so. Just because I think Wilson's stepping into, if he's getting that Devontae Adams role potentially with Aaron Rodgers, I think we know how high that ceiling is in terms of volume, and especially because he can do it at all levels. He can do it in the intermediate, the quick game. And so that's where a lot of Devontae Adams, you think about Adams' ability to attack deep, but also how often he was using the screen game with Rodgers. And I think Wilson's going to get that. I've got questions about if Michael Thomas is going to play, what we're going to get out of Derek Carr, long-term questions about the Saints quarterback position. I mean, granted, Aaron Rodgers also long-term questions about the quarterback position, but I think there are enough other things going on with Olave that while I think that they do have a similar range of outcomes, I just feel a little bit more confident in Wilson.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so excited. This is maybe me getting a bit too nerdy, but Devontae Adams, when he was with the Packers, when he moved to the slot, he was basically uncoverable. It was like, I think it was a 40% targets per route run rate. Like basically when he was in the slot, the ball went his way. If Garrett Wilson's going to get that with the Jets, he is a fantastic route runner. I think he's going to be amazing if you give him that free release from the slot. And I think that could be absolute fancy gold if that's the role he is going to play with the Jets this year. So for me, I'm going to go and grab my quarterback. You talked about him at the top as potentially in conversation with the 101, Anthony Richardson. It's the risky pick because I think there is, some potential downside with the way that, there's some concerns around his passing. But I've said this a few times, I'll say it again. I truly believe that he has got one of the highest floors from a fantasy perspective of any quarterback coming out of college because week 1, 2023, if he is starting for the Colts, he's going to be a top 24 quarterback in redraft ranks. He's going to be someone that you have to put in your lineup. You cannot say that for most rookies. If Bryce Young's starting week 1, there's probably not many people that starting him in their fantasy lineups. But because of the rushing production that Anthony Richardson puts up, he's going to be fantasy relevant from day one. And to me, yes, there are some concerns about the mechanics and him taking that step forward, but I think they're slightly overblown. I think, yes, he has some accurate concerns, but what you see with Anthony Richardson is he's processing correctly. His pocket presence is fantastic. You see the ability to avoid sacks, and not just from an athleticism standpoint, but from a reading the game, get the ball out quick standpoint. I think that he has got a lot of good quarterback traits. He just misses some throws every now and then. But, if he can work on that, I think he could be an absolute fantasy superstar.
Yeah, and I agree. And, I'd absolutely love him landing with the Colts with Shane Steichen there, with his history with Justin Herbert, with his history of development with Jalen Hurts. I mean, I think it's a great spot for Richardson. And he was on consideration. I was thinking that this was the range that if you wanted to go there, that's where you're going to have to go. Now that he's off the board, I'm back to those wide receivers again. And, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase have a little bit of a blockade on the 1 and 2 wide receiver overall in Dynasty right now. And I think there's one player that could potentially break that up, and it's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm going to step back into Devy right now, and I'm going to go with Harrison Jr. over some of the 2022 wide receivers still on the board, just because looking long term, I think he's going to have the immediate production. We're going to have a year to build hype on him. And so I think he's going to step right in there immediately. And again, if there's one player that I think can threaten those two at the top, I think it's going to be Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I'm so excited about him. I did a show last week with Jordan where I said that he's the highest graded film grade that I've ever given to a wide receiver in the last 11 years. And okay, I've only watched 3 games. I need to dive in. I normally don't dive in fully until sort of February of the rookie year. But yeah, through 3 games, he does everything and more that you could ever want from a receiver. So I love that pick here. I think he could be an absolute star. And, I think if he could not play another game for next season and he's still a top 10, probably even top 5 pick in the NFL draft next year. I think he is that good. And I've got very few questions or concerns about him. I think he's an absolute stud. For me here, I'm going to stick with the wide receiver position. We talked about a little bit earlier when we talked about Garrett Wilson. I'm going to go and grab Chris Olave. I think that for me, I'm viewing it as an upgrade on last year. We saw he was, wide receiver 26 last year in a rookie year, which is impressive, but he gets a quarterback upgrade. I think the offense is going to take a step forward. We see some other weapons. If Michael Thomas comes back, great, but we've got Juwan Johnson's taken a step forward. We've now got Foster Moreau, who's come across to play with Derek Carr again. I think this whole offense takes a step forward, and I think that gives Chris Olave more opportunities to get those high-value touches. We saw in college he was a fantastic touchdown weapon. He was used all around the red zone. I think that's how the Saints are going to continue to use him, and he's a guy that gets the deep shots, gets the touchdowns, and that's what you want from a wide receiver. I don't want 150 targets that are less than 5 yards downfield. I want those high value targets, and Chris Olave gets that and more.
Yeah, that's a great pick. He's a special player, and there's so much talent on this board right now that we're going through. What the next one? It's again, I talked about how I like to build wide receivers, but looking at players that can accrue dynasty value, and I think when you're looking at a cornerstone, that's really what you want right now. I'm gonna go with Breece Hall, and I think Breece Hall is a little bit safer than some of the other guys that are in my mind right now. I know we have the ACL injury coming back from that, but he's supposedly looking fantastic. I think he's going to be a feature piece in that Jets offense, and I think he's going to bounce back immediately to be, if he's not there already for people as that running back 2 in Dynasty, I think he's going to quickly be there again. And so I think when you're looking at high-end outcomes as well as building in some level of safety, I think Breece Hall, in my mind, stands out.
Yeah, and I think if he does come back week 1, it might open an interesting buy window, because I think he's probably going to be not 100%. You're going to see maybe, take 4 or 5 weeks to get up to scratch. And if you can sneak him away from an owner that's getting fed up because he's not putting up those monster numbers, it could certainly open that up. Yes. Are you concerned that the Jets offense is going to become, an Aaron Rodgers offense with Garrett Wilson, with Alan Lazard, with Mecole Hardman being brought in? There's going to be fewer touches for Breece Hall to go around?
I would say that I think that concern would be balanced out with efficiency in terms of actual production, converting third downs, creating red zone opportunities in that regard. But Aaron Rodgers is if he's not 40 yet, I'm blanking. I think he's 39, but he's almost 40 years old.
He's old.
So, yeah, I think there's going to be some level of caretaking involved in that. I think that the way that Robert Saleh wants to play, and you can correct me if I'm wrong as a Jets fan, but he wants to focus on that defense. He wants to rely on the run game a bit there. And so while yes, Aaron Rodgers will have his footprint on it, but at the same time, I think it's still going to be kind of that 49ers mold that we've seen in the past traditionally, with the power run game, with defense stifling people, and Rodgers being a very, very, very souped up version of Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that gets overlooked perhaps with Zach Wilson being awful was that Zach Wilson's worst area of the field in terms of accuracy was behind the line of scrimmage and under 5 yards. I have no idea how an NFL starting quarterback cannot complete simple checkdowns and screen passes. I was tearing my hair out every Sunday. So you're going to see the efficiency in the passing game, which Breece Hall already had an okay season last year, but I think you're going to see a big step forward in that, because he's going to have someone that can complete those passes and not hang him out to dry like Zach Wilson did time and time again last year. So we're now at the 8th pick. I'm going to go back to the quarterback well. I'm going to go back to this 2023 class. I'm going Bryce Young. I'm a real believer in the talent. I think that the size concerns are overblown. Give me a guy that, has produced in college, and I think he's a more accurate and a faster processor than the Alabama alums that have come before him in Tua and Mac Jones, and we've seen them produce in the NFL. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in Bryce Young, and I think he's good value here. Are you, Jeff, concerned about the size, or do you think that that's been overblown?
I think size has been overblown a little bit. Durability might be a little bit more of a concern. We've seen him get banged up a couple of times at Alabama, and I think that that's where the size does come into play. And as as that chip off that durability, that shortens windows per production, especially. And I've got questions about him being an overall fantasy asset in terms, because I don't know that he's got the rushing game that's going to translate to the NFL level. And so I have a bigger concern on that with Bryce Young than I do on his size or his durability, anything like that. It's just, I worry about low ceiling of outcomes and not having that first round pick for the Carolina next year. It might be I view it as, if they had that first round pick, get in position for a Marvin Harrison or for maybe an Emeka Ibuka, that type of player that might be that number 1 overall target in that offense, to pair him long term with Bryce Young. But if you're marrying him to Jonathan Mingo and hope to God he hits, and DJ Chark and Adam Thielen for a little bit there, and the team gets incrementally better as Young gets better, like, are you going to miss having that elite young asset with him long term? And so those are kind of my more concerns on Young, as opposed to just the size. But I mean, I hear it, and I think it's valid.
Yeah, I think, there are concerns there. He'd be a physical outlier, absolutely. I think if you're not taking that into consideration, then you're not looking at the whole picture. I completely agree with you. I would love Bryce Young so much more if DJ Moore was still with him. I think the concern of the talent around him, okay, that offensive line is solid, but I think it's a better run blocking offensive line than a pass blocking offensive line. And I think that there are definitely concerns around that surrounding talent. I do wonder if they've got a move to make, whether it's, sending out more draft capital. Could they trade for a Marquise Brown or someone like that could be available if the Cardinals are very much in blow it up mode and looking towards 2024 and beyond? I think that there's a move to come for that receiving core, because I don't believe that you can trot out DJ Chark, Adam Thielen, and Jonathan Mingo and expect, that to be competent around your hopefully superstar quarterback. But you're up now with the 9th overall, Jeff. Where are we going here?
So I was shadow boxing with you a little bit there. I was waiting to see when you were going to take one of these two quarterbacks out of 2023, and then I was going to go ahead and grab the other one. And so I'm going to grab CJ Stroud right here. And really kind of the way that I've approached both Bryce Young and CJ Stroud is I want exposure to both of them, but I've been trying to split my exposure and kind of go run the middle there on terms of if one of them misses, I didn't want to be completely out of it, but at the same time, if they hit, I'm still landing there. And so I did end up with a good amount of early 2023 picks because I was pretty aggressive through last offseason and acquiring those picks. And it turned into either I walked away with Bijan Robinson quite often or one of these quarterbacks. And that's kind of was my biggest takeaway. I didn't get much Jackson Smith and Jigba or enough Jahmyr Gibbs, but I did end up with these quarterbacks quite a bit. And so I took the approach the entire time to split the middle there. And if one's on the board, try to diversify exposure. And so with Bryce Young being off the board, I'll go ahead and grab CJ Stroud and kind of follow that mantra.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I guess my biggest concern with CJ Stroud was that processing, that ability to go 1 to 2 to 3. We did part of it is because he was thrown to Marvin Harrison Jr., but we didn't see it a huge amount in college. Do you think that that's a concern, or do you think that's something that he's got, he just didn't have to do in that Ohio State offense?
Well, I mean, we saw in the Georgia game that Georgia is a strong defense, and he brought it there. I think he brought it in other games as well, and I think that playing with Marvin Harrison Jr. and I think there was also the way that they're coached a little bit at Ohio State was to hold on to the ball a little bit longer to allow something bigger to open up downfield, and I think that's when you watch that on tape, you get concerned about that processing. And Justin Fields, you see Justin Fields come out of that offense, and there's some concerns there on processing. But again, he's the way that the Bears kind of run their offense is they didn't have a lot of that quick action, those easy throws for him. They had a lot of holding the ball in their offense and attacking vertically downfield. And so it's hard for me to strike both now Fields and CJ Stroud on processing when if I see consistencies between the two of them, I start to lean that's just how they want to run the offense and having strength across the board and physical matchups that they're going to win most weeks and allowing them to hold on to the ball, allowing them to go for those big plays. I think it's easy to talk about the processing. And when you look at him compared to Bryce Young, whose offensive line was a mess last year and whose wide receiver talent was a mess last year, Bryce is a faster processor, but it stands out that much more because he had to be that much of a faster processor last year in the system and the structure that he was set up in, whereas Stroud had a little bit more luxuries in front of him, having multiple NFL players on that offensive line, and then having Harrison Jr., having a Buka as well, and then not having his safety blanket that from the year before, Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, love it. That's perfect. Perfectly summed up. I'm going to continue with the quarterback run here. I'm going to dip into the Devy picks. I'm going to take Drake May. I think that this year is massive for him. I think if he continues to, build on what was a really impressive year last year, we could see him solidify as that 102 in the NFL draft and be a great asset for Dynasty moving forwards. But I think there's some big question marks. I think he needs to, improve the accuracy. I think he needs to improve that pocket mobility. But more importantly, he needs to continue to improve that processing. I mean, do you believe that there's that elite ceiling in there, Jeff? Or do you think that it's more concern that he could be falling down draft boards in the next year?
Oh, I think it's there. I do think it's absolutely there as well. The physical gifts are there. He has the athleticism that you love to see. He's able to run with the football. He did that very, very well. I'm concerned on two fronts because Phil Longo leaving to go to Wisconsin, that's going to be a new offense for him. And he doesn't losing Josh Downs on top of losing the players that the North Carolina offense lost couple of years ago, the Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, that group, they're bleeding talent through that North Carolina offense. And so not having a Josh Downs, not having a reliable receiver right away, they have a very good tight end, and I'm blanking on his name right now. So they do have some things there, but not having a new offensive coordinator. But the other thing that I'm worried about is we see so often with these quarterback prospects that come in with a lot of hype and then they're living under the microscope. And if they don't live up to that hype, and I think CJ Stroud is a little bit of a case of this in the pre-draft process where we expected the moon out of CJ Stroud and didn't quite get all the way there. And so for whatever reason, people wanted to fade him and that was going on. And then he still went second overall in the NFL draft. And so I think that there's some of that potential with May where he's coming in being compared to Caleb Williams just naturally because of them being separated from the rest of the quarterback group and then living under that microscope. People are going to pick those nits, and is that going to decrease the value? And then are you going to have to kind of rebuild that value is really only my concern on May.
I think it's a great point, isn't it? Because I think that when we're a year out and not everybody is kind of dived into the level that you guys dive into, you just see positives. Yes. I said I've watched 3 games of Marvin Harrison, I've watched 3 games of Drake May, I've watched 3 games of Caleb Williams. A lot of that is I'm seeing a lot of positives. Once you get to 4, 5, 6 games, once you really dive in, that's where you start to pick up on those negatives. And it's only this next kind of 6 to 9 months that we're going to start to really dive into the negative sides of things. Well, and suddenly, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say there's that, but then there's also the you hear the Devy buzz and you hear people talking about Drake May. And so then when you do sit down to watch the game, like if he's not flying around with a cape on the field and looking like Superman, you're saying, oh, what are people talking about? Like, and so I just think that kind of happens sometimes. I feel like Will Anderson out of Alabama was a player like that, where there was so much hype on him coming into last season, and then he wasn't Superman on the field. He was very, very good, but people were like, well, I expected this guy to be an uber, 1 in a million Sean Taylor, whoever it might be, like just freak of nature, and he's not quite that. And so I think that happens sometimes.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've literally put in my notes. So I do like my rookies, and then I have a quick look at the 2024 class. And as I was saying earlier, I've given Marvin Harrison the highest receiver grade in the last 11 years. And I've literally put in my notes, I said, don't judge based on elite 2022 season and be grumpy about 2023. Because I know what will happen is I'll look at my notes and I'll go, oh yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. is incredible. And I'll go in to watch him next year and be like, oh, this guy's not the greatest that I've ever watched in the last 11 years or whatever. And I'll go into it with a view of he needs to live up to best ever. And you can say that with any of that 2024 class, definitely. We're at the 11th pick here, Jeff. Who are we going for here?
I'm going to go Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Gibbs is a little bit safer as a running back selection, being the 12th overall pick in the draft, having his value in the receiving game. I think there's some other players around here that I think I have a little bit more questions about ceiling, whereas Gibbs, I think his ceiling is to be right there. I mean, we could walk out of the season. He could be Dynasty running back 2 after this year. And that's in that range of outcomes. And especially if he gets the usage out of that Detroit offense, Jared Goff using him in the short to intermediate passing game, that and just the safety that comes along with a running back, and especially a running back that's selected that high.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We've gone through those first 10 picks, and I feel like it's not chalk because there's no sort of ADP and things on this, but I feel like that was fairly straightforward. I feel like we're now in the point where this is where we're going to get quite different. And yeah, I personally would have, in the 2023 class, I've got a couple of guys I've taken above Gibbs. I've got some concerns, but yeah, we're in that point where let's shoot for upside. And as you said, he's got that potential to be that Dynasty RB2 within the next 6 months. It's definitely within his range of outcomes. For me, I'm going to go back to the 2022 class. I'm going to go Drake London. I think that if you look at the underlying stats, if you look at the advanced numbers, it's absolutely wild what he did last year. It was just that basically the offense didn't pass. I think that Desmond Ridder is a step up as a quarterback over Marcus Mariota. I think this offense, I think this whole team is going to take a step forward. They've spent significant resources on the defense. We see them add another guard. I think this offensive line is going to be above average. And I think that Arthur Smith is the one guy in the NFL that I guess, trust to basically use his offensive weapons in interesting and unique ways. And I think that Drake London, I talked about it constantly when he was coming out. I really hope that he's going to be used as a big slot and be able to use that physicality inside. I hope that Arthur Smith is going to get back to that this year, and we're going to see Kyle Pitts line up outside, Jake London in the slot. We're going to see Bijan in the slot, and it's going to be that, to steal a basketball term, that 5-out offense where it's interchangeable. And I think that Drake London could absolutely blow up this year if we see the overall passing volume in this offense step forward.
Yeah, and I hear you, and I really love the talent. I just actually did my Falcons projections, and I'm concerned because when I did my projections, I had higher passing volume, but London didn't quite get to a level that was overly exciting. And so my concern is like seeing what happened with Kyle Pitts last year, where Kyle Pitts had that dominant rookie season, topping 1,000 yards and having one of the most historic production years ever as a rookie tight end. And then disappointing to start the season, getting hurt. And like people think that he's a bust, and they think that the value has completely fallen out on him. And it's I think London is positioned similarly, where that needs to be with that passing volume. It needs to be a hyper targeted offense between London, Pitts, and Bijan Robinson, and I think it will be. But it's even like then it's still kind of a lower ceiling there, and God forbid he has quiet start to the season, gets hurt similar to Pitts. I just feel like he's set up for the value to drop out of him is what I'm concerned on. And if that does, I'm going to be snatching him everywhere I possibly can, because I really, really believe in the talent and overall and long-term in the player. But the only reason why he's still on the board here is just kind of some of those concerns.
No, makes perfect sense. So we'll have a quick run round. That's the first round. So you've gone Caleb Williams 1, Bijan Robinson 2, Garrett Wilson 3, Anthony Richardson 4, Marvin Harrison Jr. 5, Chris Olave 6, Breece Hall 7, Bryce Young 8, CJ Stroud 9, Drake May 10, Jamar Gibbs 11, and then Drake London rounding out the first round. To kick us off in the second round, Jeff, where are we going to go here?
So I'm going to go with Jackson Smith-Njigba here in the second round. I think it's statistically that one season that he put together, Ohio State, was fantastic. I think landing in the slot, I mean, certainly there are concerns. I was dismayed when I saw the Tyler Lockett extension get done, or the reworking of his deal, because it set up very nicely for him to be released because of the salary cap savings, and stepping Smith-Njigba into that worst case number 2 wide receiver in that offense, if not the primary volume wide receiver in that offense in Seattle. But I still think that I believe in the talent and the structure and everything involved with Smith-Njigba, and that's why I'm going to go him here. Makes
sense. Are you concerned about, I guess, target shares? If we're talking about DK Metcalf being in that 20 to 25% range, Tyler Lockett's normally around sort of 15 to 20%. We're running out of numbers there. Do you think that he can command enough of a target share from the slot where we're seeing those slightly lower value targets in order to be potentially, fantasy superstar, I guess, which is the price we're having to pay to acquire?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's valid. And I hear it. And that's, part of it's the rest of the board thinning out right now. And we kind of got to that range, but it's part of its belief in his overall talent. I do think that it's valid. I think that it's been interesting to me on how consensus has so strongly separated Smith and Jigba from Quentin Johnston and from Jordan Addison, because I think that there's a real argument to be made. Like, would anybody be shocked if Quentin Johnston or Addison vastly outperformed Smith and Jigba this coming season? And kind of that opens up that question on who has more value between all these guys. You see them went right out off the board 1, 2, 3, 4 in the actual NFL draft, and so I think that that's fair, that's valid. And probably this is a little bit of a homer pick going with the Ohio State Buckeye at this point, but it's just enough there that the value that he carries right now. And I know I made a whole argument about Drake London and not getting value and that volume and that not flowing through to the fantasy value, but and then I turned around and took Jackson Smith and Jigba, so I kind of chipped my base out from under myself. But no, I still believe in him enough, and I think that the overall growth is there.
No, perfect. Well, you talked about, whether another wide receiver in this year's class could outperform Jackson Smith and Jigba. I'm a big believer in Jordan Addison. He was my wide receiver 1 in the rookie process, and I'm going to grab him here. I'm quite happy. I'm very excited about him as a prospect. I think that he landed in an incredible landing spot. We're going to be able to see him, have the coverage shaded to the other side of the field. We're going to get to see him either play that flanker out of the slot, move around the offense. And I think that he could be an absolute star as soon as this season, because, it's going to be a pass first offense. I think we're going to see this offense shift more towards, let's put the ball in Kirk Cousins' hands and let him try and win us games. And yeah, I'm really excited about Jordan Addison and think it's about that point where, let's start to shoot for upside. And I think he's definitely got it.
Yeah, I think that that's a good pick, and I think that that's a safe pick. I've got Johnson slightly above Addison just because I think the overall ceiling on the two of them, Johnson possesses it, being with that Chargers offense and that kind of breaking that direction. But Addison, I can't dispute the player, and I can't dispute the safety, the production that you can get right away there. So my pick next, I'm going to go. I feel like I'm a little bit stuck on. I just said I had Johnson above Addison, and I could make the argument to take him here, but I'm going to go ahead and step into the Devy pool, and I'm going to go a little bit risky with being a tight end premium. I'm going to go with Brock Bowers out of Georgia. So we're going to get a little bit spicy on this pick. I think Bowers stepping into that tight end premium. I think he's just got sky high upside. His usage in that Georgia offense, immediate production, especially in a position that's traditionally has been hard to have that production as a freshman and a sophomore. I think he's primed to continue to ascend in the Georgia offense this year and carry a lot of high value into the 2024 rookie process.
I absolutely love the pick, and I'm very annoyed because I thought I was going to get him with the next pick. So yeah, just to pick your brains quickly, I said on last week's show that there's only 3 tight ends that I'd pick over him. I'd go Kelsey, Andrews, Cole Pitts. I'd take him over every other tight end in Dynasty, and that's with him being a year away from scoring me any points. How close to that sort of valuation on him are you, or are you a little bit less kind of, I guess, spicy and hyped up about that potential prospect?
I hear it. Really, when it comes down to it, I think that we're kind of in a breaking point in NFL offenses right now, where the proliferation, the usage of 2 tight ends has grown. And, obviously with the selection of Dalton Kincaid with Buffalo, I think we saw we have like a player like Greg Dulcich is kind of sitting there as well, and seeing. I want to see some production and success out of these big slot tight ends before I feel great about Bowers, because I think that's his role long term. So if I get proof of concept on that, some of these players, then I'll buy in on that. But right now, I want to see it first.
No, makes perfect sense. So we're now where are we? 16th overall pick. I feel like this is the range where all the guys I want to take now, I'm higher than consensus on. So it's kind of, I'm probably reaching based on consensus. I'm a little bit thinking I could maybe let them drop a little bit, but I also don't want you to get them. So I'm going to go with Kenny Pickett here. I think that the hate has gone a bit too far. I think he's massively undervalued right now. I think we saw the second half of the year what that Steelers offense can be. Yes, he's probably never going to be a QB1 for fantasy. I think he is a safe, solid, reliable, boring QB2 week in, week out. but that has an awful lot of value in Superflex formats. And yeah, I don't think the ceiling is there, but I think that that's a high, safe floor. So at this point, middle of the second round, I think I'm very happy to take that.
Yeah, and he's been in my mind on this is the right range for him, and it's hard for me to pull the trigger. I feel like on Kenny Pickett, but I hear your argument and I get it. And being in Superflex, this is the value on him, and I think that that's a good pick. And you're exactly right. We're in a really weird range here where a lot of the players on the board, it's like people like are way in on their own flavor, and it kind of is like that, and there's no more consensus. But I'm going to step back in the Devy pool again, and I'm going to take Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, and that's just a bet on upside here that versus some of the other running backs on the board versus some of the other positions on the board. I think that Henderson has a chance to really gain value with Ohio State this year and come into next year as that next guy that is a top 5 dynasty running back before he steps on the field. And so I'm going to go with Henderson.
Love it. And how close, I know there's the kind of a year ago, it was Henderson's kind of RB1 job to lose. There's been some hype recently about Raheem Sanders, potentially that RB1 in this year's class. Is it a big gap for you? Are they close, or kind of how do you view that?
No, I don't think it's a big gap. I think that had Henderson not been hurt last year, he probably would have separated himself. Because of that injury, that's allowed that gap to shrink. And I think that Henderson has a little bit more utility in the passing game, as well as a little bit more big play explosion. And so that's why I think things that translate well. Whereas I think Sanders is going to be able to have more volume. My concern there is, does that role exist in current NFL offenses to have a back that is eating a ton of volume? It just seems like they're transitioning away from that.
Yeah, okay, makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to dive back into some wide receivers. I'm going to go with another of, I guess, my guys. Jahan Dotson, I think that there's not enough talked about. I think he was, we talked about the elite prospects in that 2022 class. I think it was an elite 6. I think he was undervalued in the rookie process. I think he produced when he was on the field last year. I think he's got an opportunity to take another step, and I'm really excited about him as a prospect coming into this season. I think we could be talking about him as that potentially top 12 dynasty wide receiver as soon as 6 months' time. So yeah, maybe a little bit of reach versus consensus, but I'm happy to go and grab him here.
Yeah, I think we're all throw it in the bucket and take the guys that I feel like is there consensus in this range? I feel like there shouldn't be, but there is always consensus where there shouldn't be. But I'm going to go with another wide receiver from 2022. I'm going to go with Jameson Williams, and I know that he had the injury and then now he has the suspension, and maybe he profiles more as a downfield threat that doesn't going to have a lot of volume, but in that Alabama offense with Bryce Young, they used him a lot in the quick and intermediate game, and that's what you want to see, I think, out of a receiver, but also the ability to have those splash plays. And I think that despite having the suspension lingering over top of him, the Lions really didn't do anything to address that position in the draft. He's going to step right in and be a focal point of that offense, I think, when he gets back. And I think another year healthy off that ACL even factors into it too. And so you're probably time to buy low on Williams right now, but I'm going to go ahead and buy him.
Are you concerned about, I guess, the non-existent history of guys that didn't produce in their rookie year? He's going to miss the start of this year. It feels like there's a lot of pressure on probably a 3-4 game window when he's back in order for him to produce in that second year before we're getting into potentially third year breakout, which doesn't happen very often.
Well, I saw him on an NFL field last year when he was back healthy, and the explosion, his speed jumped off the tape, and that's something that you saw in college. It's some of these guys that just physically look like they are on a completely different plane. And I know that he didn't get numbers last year, but I think a lot of Lions treated that as a lost season, and then until they ended up not being a lost season. I think that explains some of the usage on DeAndre Swift through the middle of last season, towards the end of last season. I think Jameson Williams, they viewed it as this is going to be a lost season, getting him on the field. That's great, but we're not going to put too much on him in a year that we didn't think we're going to do too much. But they did pull into it the way that the NFC playoff race broke. but there was a touchdown that was called back. There was a touchdown that was actually scored where like this is rare ability that this guy has. And so I think statistically, I understand the concerns on that. If you're a model guy, a process guy, I understand where you would write that off, and especially that limited production window in college, just to that one season. But I think the physical traits are enough that are just, there's not very many players like him.
And he's going to get those high value touches. We talked about it at the top. What one deep shot is worth 3 underneath targets, basically, and that's where he's going to be used. He's going to get that opportunity to have those big plays, to have those big touchdowns, and that's going to put up some big fantasy points for you. I'm going to continue. It feels like it's going to be a bit of a wide receiver trend. I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. I think that, I love the prospect. I think there's a lot of talent there. I like the landing spot. I probably would have liked the landing spot a lot more if Odell Beckham hadn't signed as well. But I think that he's a guy that is going to be able to move all over the field. He's a guy that I think can play that split end, can play flanker, can play out the slot. Is a good route runner. I think he's going to be able to translate the second he walks on the field. And I think there's a lot of potential there. It might take a year before we see the high fantasy heights, but I think from an NFL aspect, he's going to hit the field. He's going to be useful in this offense, and that will only allow him to kind of build and grow that role into his second and third year and beyond.
Yeah, I think we're all in the range of these wide receivers, and I think that we probably have somewhat similar mindset when it comes to building dynasty, and especially cornerstones, grabbing those young wide receivers. And it's fun though, because I think you're a little bit more statistically based than I am, and so it's creating a fun dynamic here on who's going to go off the board. And so I'm trying to play off that a little bit and allow players that I like to slide a little bit more, read the room a little bit. But I'm going to go. And that all that is to say that I'm stalling because I'm not entirely sure who I want to pick right now, but I'm going to go ahead and go with Ken Walker out of the 2022 class. And I'm dismayed, concerned that they added Zach Charbonnet, and I see the argument that Walker might be diminished in his role. But again, he does have the explosion that he played off of last year, and that was where a lot of his fantasy production came out of. And so he is that type of player that if he does get enough touches, those big explosives can be there, and he can return value on that. I think the other wide receivers that are kind of in this range, there's a little bit more questions, concerns on those players, whereas a little bit safer pick to take the running back.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that there's an awful lot of talk about Zach Charbonnet taking, a lot of work from Ken Walker. And I think that there's going to be enough volume in this offense. I think this offense is going to be really, really good. I think that offensive line, it's got 2 back-end tackles. I think they're probably a guard away from being elite. I think Geno Smith showed last year that he's can kind of, spearhead a decent offense. We talked about 3 wide receivers earlier. I think that there's going to be enough volume and high-value touches that Ken Walker, maybe he's not going to be a 20-carry-a-game guy, but if he can get, 15 carries, 2 or 3 targets a game and get decent work around the goal line, that's enough to be potentially a fancy RB1, which at this point in the draft, that feels like really good value and is a guy that you want to potentially build around for those next sort of 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and I think I want to build off that real quick if we can. I think it's when you're looking at a vacuum, looking at just Ken Walker, and you can say, well, he's not going to be a full-time bell cow running back, and I want to be off on that. But when you look at this class, that these 27-year-old running backs that we got accustomed to being bell cow backs, the Joe Mixons and kind of that group, Dalvin Cook, as they age out, there's not a lot of those young guys in the NFL that are going to be those high volume guys. And so then I think you're going to start to look more towards those players that can be explosive, that can get you those high end running back 1 weeks. And it's almost going to be like, I think how some people view wide receiver once you get outside of those top early, those really high volume guys where it's a little bit more boom bust in it, but you want guys that can boom and give you those spike weeks compared to kind of looking for that solid consistency. And I think Walker has that capability.
Yeah, every time he touches the field, there's potential that he can take the ball to the house. So that's the kind of guy that you want in your fantasy lineup, isn't it? He can win you a week almost on one play. So for me, I'm going to continue my wide receiver run here. I'm a little bit torn whether to go back to the 2022 class. There's a guy left in the 2023 class that's sort of toying with it. But yeah, I'm going to go with Quentin Johnson. I think I'm not the biggest believer. I think there's some real concerns, but love that offense, love the talent. I think that if he is used in the correct manner, which is short intermediate routes, get the ball in his hands, make him be a playmaker after the catch, I think he could be fantastic. If they try and go square peg round hole and try and turn him into this deep threat that he's not, then yeah, I'm really concerned about what could be his kind of potential. But I think at this point in the draft, it's good value, and you know, I'm happy to take the punt on him here.
Yeah, it felt like you didn't want to take him, and I was going to try to see how far I could let him go before I grabbed him. And so, but you called my bluff there a little bit. So good on you. I think that's a good pick, and that was a guy that I definitely had circled and was looking at. While we're still looking at the wide receiver position, I feel like I have to take Christian Watson at this point. I know that he's already 24, and there's some concerns of what that Green Bay offense is going to look like with the loss of Aaron Rodgers. But I think that he is the one guy on the board that has a great opportunity right now to be a major high volume earner. And I think that Watson is going to be my pick here.
Yeah, that was the guy that I was kind of toying between whether to go Watson or Johnston. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I think my concern for Watson is that he had more reliance on high value touches than any other wide receiver in the NFL last year. You know, he had a huge volume of deep shots. He had a huge volume of red zone targets. We're probably going to see that reduce just because I think the offense is, you know, it's not going to be so pass heavy in those situations. I think we could see the run game utilized more in the, you know, goal to go areas than an Aaron Rodgers led offense. So it could be that we see a slight reduction in those red zone looks, but I think at this point it's a good value. For my final pick here, for the final pick of the draft, I'm going to stick with wide receiver. I'm going to go George Pickens. Look, it feels like he has, you know, of anyone in this sort of draft, he has the talent to be, honestly, wide receiver one. Let's be honest. I think he has got everything in that body that he could be an absolute superstar. It's just putting it together. And do I think he's going to do it? Probably not. But at this point, I'm just shooting for upside, and I think that he could be a star. So, you know, why not? Let's stack him with Kenny Pickett and hope that it becomes a high flying offense.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick, and God, there's a lot of talent still left on the board. But I mean, that speaks to how much talent has come in over these last three classes, the instant impact that we saw out of the 2022 rookies, and probably some excitement about 2023 rookies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about talent left on the board. Is there any names that particularly stand out to you that we didn't draft that you'd be looking at sort of scooping up right here?
Gosh, all these running backs from last year, a guy like a Damian Pierce or a James Cook or like Rachaad White or, you know, Treylon Burks is still incredibly on the board, is surprising, but at the same time, not surprising. Zach Charbonnet in this year's class, just, you know, pick your flavor on some of these wide receivers in this year's class. If you like Josh Downs or if you're a Marvin Mims guy, I mean, there's just, you know, we could get to 60 picks and still feel like we're still taking quality guys, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent in these three classes. Looking to the kind of 2024, put your Devy hat back on. Is there any players that you're excited about in this sort of next on the board? We talked about Raheem Sanders. There's obviously, you know, Braylon Allen, Xavier Worthy, Emeka Egbuka. Anyone that you think could push up into this potentially top 24 picks at the start of the year?
Yeah, I mean, definitely those running backs, Raheem Sanders, Braylon Allen that you mentioned. I'm not writing off Will Shipley. I think Will Shipley is going to be in a high value offense in Clemson in a big role, and especially a high passing role. And yeah, I mean, Egbuka, I think, is going to be that wide receiver 2 likely. Worthy, if he gets back to what he showed as a freshman, he had a little bit of a down year last year, but I think the skills are certainly there. You know, I think you feel good about the 2024 picks right now, and a lot of that comes out of, there's always the talk around, well, you're just selling the next class, but some of that is how high Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison, and we saw how high they went in this draft, how high a value that those players hold. But some of it is there's a lot of players that are really poised, like right on that edge there, that can step and really increase value.
Yeah, there's some supreme talent, certainly at some of those higher value positions. Thank you ever so much for coming on, Jeff. It's been an absolute delight. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking through with you. Remind the listeners and viewers, where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
You can find me at Twitter for whom J Bell tolls. You can find me with Football Guys and all kinds of stuff coming out there. The Football Guys College Football Show comes out on Thursdays every week, and you can find me with the Devy Royale as well. And a lot of YouTube work going up there, so check out the Devy Royale on YouTube and join the Patreon. But Rich, thank you so much, and follow Rich. Follow Dynasty Island is fantastic. Rich does so much good work in the community. He's a positive presence, and he's just great always to interact with. And so I always enjoy when I see your posts. They're always insightful, and I can always tell that you've done the work. And so thank you so much for having me on. And again, I just really appreciated this opportunity.
No, awesome. It's been great chat through. Whilst you're here, guys, if you're watching, make sure you give us that like, make sure you give us that subscribe. We're closing on that big 1,000 number. So do us a solid, and we'll be back next week.